Welcome to this conversation with the title Begin Within. It's been striking to me this year that in some ways we have been reminded in everything that has happened of deep realities that we work very hard and effectively to deny that the ground beneath our feet is always less solid than we believe it to be, that civilization rests on bodies, breathing in proximity to other bodies. During the pandemic, we've been sent inside, and we've all been together in this in some civilizational way, and yet each of us has also been sent inside ourselves. We have been alone with this, even if we were sharing quarantine with a house full of people. And this year's many ruptures have also called us to distinguish, to use language like essential and non-essential, to make distinctions like that. We've also hit inner limits as we have opened and awakened to personal and societal failings over against other human beings who are our neighbors, our kin, our fellow citizens. In my mind, through my life of conversation, the question of what it means to be human, which is as old as all of us, is inextricable in this century from the question of who we will be to each other. So I bring all of that to this conversation today, wondering how this year and these kinds of questions and shared experiences redefine what we mean when we use words like wellness, inner peace, and self-care, and how we want to practice and live into those. I am excited to discuss all of that with this panel, not here with me in the traditional sense, but here with me in the 2020 sense. It's a wonderful range of human intelligence and experience. Jill Scott is a Grammy award-winning singer and songwriter, and also, we will speak about this, the lead investor in a new app called True Voice. Rangan Chatterjee is a physician on our frontiers of functional medicine, what he calls his progressive approach to healing, and he's the star of the BBC's show Doctor in the House. Jud Brewer is a neuroscientist and psychiatrist and director of research and innovation at Brown University's Mindfulness Center. And Sharon Salzberg is one of the most esteemed spiritual teachers in the world, and one of the people who brought Buddhist psychological intelligence and contemplative depths and practical tools for living into mainstream Western culture in the last half century. And of course, she was very, very young when she started to do that. So we have been asked to let this be more like a dinner party conversation than a panel, and I'm all for that. I'm going to kick this off and be the host of the party, but hope that people will ask questions and respond to each other. And I know that there is a chance to interact for the audience with Rachel Goldstein in the chat as well. I want to start, so, this phrase, begin within, I would like to start with asking everybody at a very personal level, what that has meant for you, begin within this year. And whether there might be practices or insights that 2020 has deepened or opened to you in a different way. I would like to pose that question to everybody who's with us, everybody who's listening in and viewing, that this can be a collective moment of reflection. And I actually want to start with Sharon Salzberg, but I'd like to invite Sharon too, as we all ponder that, to ground us for a few moments.
Sure, thank you. Why don't we all just sit comfortably? You can close your eyes or not. Feel your energy come down into your body. Feel the earth supporting you. Feel space touching you. And feel the movement of your breath, which is life itself. Just the natural in and out breath. And the key word is rest. We're going to rest our attention on the feeling of the breath. Thoughts might come and go, sensations, emotions, whatever. But we're just resting. So thank you for that opportunity. In response, Krista, to your question, I would say I feel I'm at a funny moment where within and without are not so distinct anymore. I think that, like many people, we can just go and go and go and be overcome with responsibility and tasks and things, and we forget that we need to restore, we need to rest, we need some way of building capacity to meet adversity. It's not just the meeting of it, but it's actually building the capacity. But I think part of that capacity is not so alone and cut off and isolated, even if you are in physical isolation. And I'm always remembering not everyone is, there are many people who are working every day, but if you are, even if you are in physical isolation, there's something about this profound sense of connection to others, which I think is maybe the most vital thing for our time. So as we work to restore, and as I work to restore, and kind of remember resilience and that getting depleted serves nobody, I'm also remembering this line from Wendell Berry, the poet, who said, "The smallest unit of health is a community." And that I need to kind of have that perspective as well.
Thank you. Jill, what has begin within looked like for you this year?
Well, clearly, 2020 has been a very challenging year for everyone. Within my community, we've seen a lot of social unrest, but it's the same social unrest that we've been exhausted about for years, hundreds. The same as my great grandmother, my grandmother before that. I've noticed that personally, there are moments when I'm so angry and I feel trapped. There are moments of fear, intense fear. Um, there are moments where I've noticed feeling lost and trying my best to reconnect to all the goodness, all the wonder, all the love that exists. Trying to find these things, and that is the work. That is what's going on, in my head and heart. And I'm hoping that this conversation will spark some people to hold on to the goodness, what is truly valuable, not just the things that we have.
Thank you. Rangan.
Yeah, so I think, like everyone, it's been a different year. It's not been the year that many of us expected, back in January. And I guess, like all of us, we've got multiple roles, don't we? I'm a physician, so I see patients. I'm a father, so I'm trying to look after my kids and insulate them from the stresses in society, help them come to terms with what is going on and how school life and how their life is changing. But also, I'm an individual, and I've realized, like many of us, I've really had a lesson in terms of what's truly important, what are the kind of excesses in life, and going within. I thought I used to go within pretty well, but I think it's been ramped up so much over the past few months. And I've actually realized that going within it's one of the most important things for all of us. And particularly as the stress sort of ramps up around us, we actually need to go inwards more the more that stress is going on, so that we can actually start to get in touch with ourselves and understand what we're feeling. So going within for me is about awareness. And many of us at the moment are walking around unaware of the stress that's building up. I've often spoken about we've all got our personal stress threshold. And I used to make the case that we're often leaving the house with 10 or 15 what I call micro stress doses. And that means we're very near our threshold, which means it doesn't take much to tip us over in the day. And this is what I'm seeing with my friends, with my patients, with my family, is that people are walking around very close to their personal stress threshold. And I think going within is essential to give us awareness of that.
Yeah. Jud.
I've noticed that, my clinic, my teaching, my research lab, they've all gone virtual. And, my travel schedule has just gone to zero. And that's been a real wake up in terms of what normal, quote unquote, normal was and what they signified, and to really go within to explore what's it like to connect in ways that I haven't connected before, doing conferences, for example, virtually, teaching virtually, working with my lab virtually, and also looking at uncertainty. My lab has studied a lot of, how do habits form, for example, and just looking at how uncertainty drives the formation of habits or the fostering of unhealthy habits. We've seen this societally with increases in alcohol use. We've seen it, this quote, quarantine 15, as people gain weight when they're outside of their norm and trying, their brains are trying to work with uncertainty. So that's been one thing that I've really been exploring is, how do I meet and how do we as a society meet uncertainty?
I'm really struck. I mean, I've been struck by this all year, but I'm very much struck in this conversation with what feels like a new quality of willingness we all have to start in quite a deep place, right? A panel discussion like this would not have gone where it's gone with such honesty, where we're kind of wearing our humanity on our sleeves in a new way. Each one of you is on at least one frontier. Some of you are on more than one, but at least one frontier of where we, I think, are really transforming our entire imagination and orientation, transforming the meaning of what it means to lead a healthy, happy, and resilient life. We're filling those words and our imaginations about them with all kinds of new connotations that are scientific and spiritual and human. I think, Rangan, I might start with you, just because I would say that the frontier you're on of health, right? Optimal health is a phrase that you use, but I really want you to explain what that means in terms of what we know now and how you're seeing the field of medicine, but also the matter of human health in a whole new way. In some ways, I think someone might look at this panel and say, you are the one who is most literally doing wellness and well-being, but you're doing it in a completely different way than you learned in medical school, or than most of us have thought of what it means for us to be healthy. So what does optimal health mean? How can that become a part of our vocabulary for living?
Yeah, I mean, in the pre-pandemic world, optimal health for me was the recognition that, in medicine, things can be very black and white. You're either sick with a disease or you are normal. And there hasn't been that much recognition within my profession about that space in between, that actually what is optimal, not whether you are sick or you're normal, what is optimal. And like many doctors, I've seen time and time again that people are walking around, they don't realize how good they could feel. And I really think that's been magnified during this pandemic. So it's been very clear to me in my 20 years of practice now that health is quite a limiting term, actually. Health is conventionally, what do people think about? They think about their blood markers, their weight, have they got energy? But health, we've seen this year, is so much more than that. Health is the quality of your relationships, the quality of your interactions with your work colleagues, whether you know your neighbors or not. One of the most phenomenal things we saw right at the start of the pandemic, I think all over the world, but certainly I'm more familiar with what happened in the UK, is this outpouring of kindness. People in communities who had never knocked on their neighbors' doors before, knocking, checking their elderly neighbors have got shopping, whether they need any help, the sort of thing that many of us were too busy to do before. And so I think it's been a really, in some ways, a nice reminder that actually the key components of health were there. They were within us. They still are within us. It's just that life somewhere got so busy and we got so distracted by keeping up with the Joneses, with family, with work, with 3 social media channels. We forgot what it truly means. And the other thing I think is worth saying is that I think when we talk about optimal health, we can't talk about it as an individual. Western society, for sure, has been quite individualistic about looking at, how can I be in optimal health? How can I improve my wellness? But I think the question for all of us at the moment is, well, can we truly be healthy and well if the world around us is sick, if our neighbors are struggling? And I really think the sort of stress and the pandemic of 2020, for all the negatives, which there have clearly been, I'm an optimist. I believe that there will be a positive, a huge positive at the end of this, which will be a real understanding of what it truly means to be healthy. What it truly means to be healthy is what it truly means to be human, to be a thriving human, to engage in the world, to have a community around you, to feel connected to something bigger than yourself. I think that's going to be the hidden gold at the end of this year. And look, yeah, I could keep talking about this for an hour, so I'll stop there. But it's huge for me, really, that the impact I think it's going to have across the whole world in terms of redefining health.
But I also want to just a little bit go, in terms of how you think about health in the human body. When you speak about how we're starting to realize that so much of what we've treated and paid attention to were actually symptoms, when we diagnose chronic diseases, we're actually suddenly seeing something that's been going wrong on a systemic level for a long, long time. That we're starting to see inflammation, and seeing that inflammation replicates in 1,000 ways. When I hear you speak about what we're learning about how we function, which also really blurs the lines between what is physical and what is emotional and what is spiritual and what is mental, it also sounds like a description of our societal dysfunction. I mean, Jill, you have started, you're behind a new initiative called True Voice, and I'd like for you to share with us what that means for you. But also, and I think that what it points at, in part, I'd like to hear more about this, is what the word wellness means for you, and what has been missing in how that word has been coming down to us in media and culture.
First, I really want to say thank you for having me here. I am not a doctor. Oh, I am, but not in that way. I'm a voyeur. I'm a writer. I pay attention. I like to be invisible and watch people. And what I've been noticing is that we are in shock. And we've been in shock for quite some time, which makes inflammation, which makes our jaws tight and our shoulders high and our bodies stiff. We're not relaxed because there is an extreme measure of anger and fear that's involved in our humanity on a daily basis. Optimal health, in my view, is a genuine sense of peace of mind, allowing ourselves to find, receive, and encourage joyfulness, to be a blessing to someone else, to to help someone else, to allow others to help us as well. True Voice has been created because I see a lot of my people, we don't know how to live. We know how to exist. And that is not enough. It's not fair to the creator that gave us this existence, this life, and we're not living to our fullness, and we should. True Voice is an app that will help people and remind people to be mindful about breathing, to be mindful about drinking water, about stretching, because we don't know how to live. And I want that deeply, so that society on a whole can heal. It's imperative that we deal with each other in a way beyond anger, beyond fear, beyond just tolerance. It's not enough. And this is why I'm here. Thank you.
When you hear the word wellness and well-being used culturally, and it really is everywhere now, what is it that's missing for you that you'd like the rest of us to incorporate into our imaginations? What you hear that might not always be there when wellness is discussed?
Therapy. Therapy is a big one. Being able to release and not harbor energy and thoughts, to release is gigantic. It helps us overall with our physical state, our mental state, our spiritual states. And this is what being a human is all about. We're supposed to have an internal glow. And I feel and see that we've been dulled and we're dulling ourselves. Wellness is about the internal glow, shining out, responding to not only humankind, but animal kind and earth as well. There is supposed to be in harmony. And I believe that we are not. And that troubles me.
I want to encourage everybody to jump in if you feel like it. It's a little bit, we're all getting used to this format for having a conversation, right? Sharon, you and I had a conversation about, well, I think something you are such an important teacher for me and others on is that self-care is connected to our presence to be caring towards others and towards the world. That it's not optional. It's not an indulgence. I think this flows out of what Jill said. It's absolutely essential for us to be whole, and our world can't be whole if we are not, each and every one of us, whole. But I think that's counterintuitive in this culture.
Yeah, I think it's counterintuitive, and there's such a premium often in the dominant culture here on control, like we're supposed to be in control of absolutely everything. So if we're frightened, if we're alarmed, if we're angry, if we're overcome by something, we feel that's wrong. We've lost control. And so we don't necessarily work with those feelings in a useful way. And if someone else is suffering, then certainly we would rather kind of tuck them away so we don't have to see it. And that's not right either. But when I think of wellness or well-being, I actually think of responsiveness. It's like the body's ability to respond or the heart's ability to respond. And so when I think of stress, I also think of it always as a dynamic. There's the stress, the pressure, the circumstance, the incident, and then there's the resource with which it's being met. And the resource may be very much about one's inner capacities, if we've cultivated them, of presence, of balance, of kindness, and so on. And it's very much about having a sense of community. So actually, it's funny when I look at Jud, who's an old friend, and I realize he's the only person who I've lent my brain to for science when he was at Yale, when his lab was at Yale. And we were discussing, because I'd spent the night at his house, we were discussing this quality called equanimity in the Buddhist terminology, which sounds really dull and not very appealing, but it doesn't mean indifference. It means like a huge capacity to hold it all and to have wisdom, to have perspective. And I asked him if that could ever be measured. And then the next day in the lab, we were doing the the test, he had a cap that he put on my head. It took like 45 minutes to get on, and then I would meditate for a minute or two, and then he would ask me what my experience was, and he would show me how that mapped to my brainwaves. And there was one point where I had a lot of thinking and all this stuff coming up, but I was with it in a very different way. I was able to respond without being so overcome and defined by it. And I told him that, and he said, "You asked about equanimity. This is equanimity." I don't know if you still feel that way, Jud, but it's those incredible abilities we have to relate differently. And, just to repeat something that's been a theme, it's like never feeling like we need to be alone, really, because we're not alone. The truth is that we live in an interconnected universe, but we superimpose this sense of it being just me, and I have to work it out, and no one understands, and which is very unfortunate.
Mm-hmm.
Jud, you're really on a cutting edge of how we learn to. I think self-mastery is a word that gets used in the context of your work, but I think that's kind of that's a 20th century way of phrasing this, of how we can have agency, how what we're understanding about our brains and our bodies, our minds, well-being in the deepest sense, how we can actually take charge of that, practice it so that it becomes instinctive and starts to define us more than dysfunction has defined us.
Well, we often think of self-mastery as doing something to better ourselves, which in fact gets in the way. Sharon's talking about equanimity, and we think, if I just, I need to better myself. And that actually moves us away from equanimity, because we are focused on what am I doing wrong and what can I do better? And then judging ourselves for not being as good as we think we should. When we step back and look at this actually just builds on some of these old survival mechanisms that our brain has, it's left over from helping us remember where food is. Most of us have refrigerators now, so that's not as critical to remember, where the refrigerator is, and also avoiding danger. And, in modern day, we're starting to avoid danger in different ways, in this sense. So here, we've got this survival brain that's trying to help us survive. And then we've got this new brain, this neocortex, literally, that's involved in thinking and planning. But we've kind of conflated this, I need to think and plan, I need to do, on top of that. And in that sense, we're just kind of getting caught up in doing, which is actually getting in the way of being. And this goes back to what Jill talked about, what Rangan was talking about. When we really get out of our own way and we can see what it's like to kind of trip ourselves up, we can learn to stop doing that. And this is what Sharon and others have been teaching, is how to learn to be rather than do.
And would you say it's less about bettering yourself and more about knowing yourself?
I'm so glad you say that, because the more we know ourselves, the more we realize that it's pretty good as it is. And the more we try to better ourselves, the worse it gets.
Yeah, I think what you said, Jill, there was and Jud, was just so key. And I think on a personal level has been one of the big learnings for me this year is stop trying to do this and bettering yourself here and improving here. It's really about learning how to let go. And I think that's been a big theme of the year for me personally and with my family, is just let go. You can't control. I mean, the world has shown us this year that, we think we give ourselves the illusion of control, but, the world has changed. We can't control what's going on out there. And the more we can know ourselves, spend time with ourselves, I think a lot of us are realizing, we're sort of doing pretty well as things are, without having to be someone and having to try to pretend. I think the other thing this year has been a big thing about, vulnerability. People are, they're really opening up. And of course, not everyone, but a lot of people, I think, are feeling that they can open up and be themselves and share how they're truly feeling, not the act, not the facade that they're putting on. But I do want to say that, just to be really sensitive and really clear, everyone, has been experiencing some consequence of this pandemic, but people are experiencing it in different ways. And I think we have to be super sensitive to people who are still going into work all the time, are maybe on the front lines, are facing a lot of financial stress, poverty, worry. And I think wellness and health is going to look different depending on how you are experiencing the current norms in society.
Yeah, there's so much loss in our midst, right? So many different kinds of loss. And then, as Jill said, also pain and, injustice isn't really a big enough word. That's actually been in our midst for a long time. And it's those wounds are out on the surface for more to see and feel and imagine their complicity in, imagine our complicity in. So yeah, somehow wellness. I feel like the wellness industry until this year was about, well, it could look pretty trifling compared to what we're up against now, right? Which we were always up against, but we weren't necessarily holding it together.
Wellness was some kind of luxury for those people who have front lawns and back lawns and fountains in front of their house. Wellness was for rich stay-at-home, wives, and, they went to their yoga class so they could look like, somebody that they've seen on television. Wellness has become mandatory for all of us. I've noticed places like Holland. They have healthcare for everyone. The education system is pretty amazing. Most children speak 3 or 4 languages. They ride bikes everywhere. They have lunch under trees in the park on a normal basis. I think in this place, particularly in the United States, I cannot see that we know how to live. And because we don't know how to live, we're in this perpetual state of dying. Anger, hatred, fear, they're consuming. And it's COVID-19 has brought all of this to the surface, like you said. And now we're able to see it and deal with it. We have to deal with our societal issues. It's unhealthy for everyone, everywhere. It's very clear. So one step at a time. I thank you so much for breathing with us in the beginning. Just, okay. Trying to figure out how to handle it all. We can't handle it all. How do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time. It's one bite at a time. So maybe we drink more water and take more walks. Maybe we stop and smell flowers and notice birds in the trees or hear their song. It may sound romantic. It's not. It's absolutely, unequivocally necessary. We have to start living this dying business.
Well, Jill, you bring up something around, this has kind of forced us out of our comfort zones, right? So yeah. A lot of industries around how to make people comfortable and how to make people stay in their comfort zones, and there's a big industry around that. When we're forced out of our comfort zones, which we've all been forced out of, there are 2 ways that we can go. One is into a panic zone where, uncertainty, this is really scary. How do I get back to my comfort zone as quickly as possible? Or if that's too far away, we just start panicking, and things get worse. And this is where we've got runs on toilet paper at the grocery store, things like that don't need to happen. The other place or the other direction in which we can turn is into a growth zone. And this is where moving out of this comfort zone, knowing our minds a bit, can help us see, oh, this is uncertainty. There's an opportunity here to learn about myself, see what my habitual reactions are, my urges to run back to my comfort zone, the ways that I've done that in the past, what that's gotten me and what that's getting me now, and also to lean in, to turn toward, and to see, oh, here's something that's different. Can I be with this? Can I be okay with this? And this goes back to what Sharon was talking about. Can we bring some equanimity? Can we bring some balance in? With that balance, we can actually open up to uncertainty rather than close down and turn away from. And as we open up, it moves us from these fixed mindsets more into, as Carol Dweck puts it, growth mindset, where we can look and learn from what's happening, because this is what's happening, rather than turning away from it.
Well, we can't go back to our comfort zones, can we? Because they're gone. It's like, I don't know what it would even be. It's hard to remember, like getting the right seat on the airplane for the third trip of the week, or something like that. They're gone. And so, and I want to say, in addition to the anger and the fear that Jill was talking about, there was so much indifference, there was so much numbness in many people's lives. And that's been really gone too, in so many ways. And that brings up the possibility, and which is an opening. It is a sense of possibility. So I really appreciate that sense of a growth mind state. I don't know what the alternative would be except just stagnation, like panic in place, kind of freezing.
Yeah.
I think it's just so hard for anyone to see how ugly they really are. That's a tough one to take. That my ways aren't helpful. That my energy is toxic. And these are the things, because of COVID-19, because of this quarantine, we have no choice but to see ourselves. Now it's up to you on what you do with it. Do you want to continue the ways that don't benefit yourself, your family, or society? You make a choice about how to live. Existing, as I said, and I will always say it, is just not enough.
Yeah.
It's not even a slice. I want the whole pie. Don't you want the whole pie?
Yeah. I think another thing this year, which, as you just said, Jill, about really living and thriving and being, this thriving human engaging in this wonderful planet, is, I think, if we think about judgment, because I have seen a society all over the world be quite judgmental. You see this on social media, you see it everywhere. And I think we can use judgment as our mirror. And I've really seen, let's say, as Jud mentioned, this run on toilet paper, right, at the start of the pandemics, which was in the press. We've been, or whether it was, in the UK, and I'm sure it was the same in the US, when there was some lockdowns and some people were not abiding by the recommendations, they were congregating. And there was real sort of polarization at people looking down on people who are not abiding by the rules and are not sticking to things, and really being quite derogatory about them. This thing can be used as a mirror, because really we have to understand someone else's perspective. For me, health is acceptance. It's understanding someone's got a different view to me, right? Someone's choosing, for whatever reason, they may have, an elderly family members who they're looking after, and they're concerned about toilet roll, so they buy 10 packets. Okay, fine. It doesn't mean that they're not caring about society. Or maybe when there was a run on these things, maybe each person who went in bought one extra, than they normally would. So by the end of the day, suddenly the shelf is empty. It wasn't anyone was being particularly selfish. And I really feel judgment is a really great teacher for all of us. When we judge someone else, it's like, well, what's going on there? Why am I looking down on them? Why do I look, why do I have a different perspective? And when I'm judging someone else, am I not just really judging myself? Is this not really the mirror to help teach us? And I really feel that is something I work on every day. It's like catch myself if I am falling into judgment, and then trying to go, no, I don't want to just tolerate either. I want to accept. I want to accept that people view the world differently. And so I think this is part of us getting connected to ourselves, but also really connected in a compassionate way to every single person around us, even if they have a different perspective.
I think
Sounds
something
good.
sorry. Jill, were you?
I'm saying that it sounds good. How do we begin to teach our children how to exist in this way? I would think it would start with school, right? At home?
Yeah. I think it starts at home for me. I think I'd like to think it starts at school, but I think it has to start at home. It has to start with the culture that the children are surrounded by. And again, I understand that can sound incredibly privileged because it depends on your family situation, the dynamic at home. But this is not meant to sound trite, but having a child say 3 things that they're grateful for each day from the age of 3 and 4 is incredibly powerful. It helps to shift perspective. What if every single child in every single country was taught that as a practice from the age of 3 or 4? What kind of world would we be developing and cultivating? I think these small things are incredibly powerful. And I think with children, we can teach them, but we can also model them. If the adults around these children are just saying you should do this, you should do that, but not modeling it ourselves, I think that's where the problems lie. And it's something that I talk with my patients about. It's something my kids, for then they're 10 and 7 years old, probably for 5 years now. Every evening around the dinner table, we answer 3 questions. What have I done today to make somebody else happy? What has somebody else done today to make me happy? And what have I learned today? Simple, doesn't take any time, connects us. But I really see it in the children, and they tell their friends that it shifts their perspective on the world. And so I'm passionate that these small things really should be, rolled out across society. And also, they don't cost anything, right? Krista, you mentioned at the start about wellness, and Jill, you mentioned, wellness is this middle class ideology for people who've got spare time and spare money. But as you say, wellness belongs to everyone, and it doesn't need to be about expensive supplements and superfoods. A few simple practices like a gratitude practice, journaling, some breath work, some meditation. These things are all free. They are accessible. I've used them when I've worked in very deprived communities. I've used these same practices with my patients, and they really, really make a difference.
I think. Oh, go ahead, Sharon.
Well, I think part of what's delicate in the modeling is that hopefully one is modeling both that tremendous compassion and also discernment, because letting go of judgment, that kind of corrosive, harsh judgment, doesn't mean letting go of intelligence or discernment. Because I was thinking of some of the frontline medical personnel that I've been working with a lot who say they are enraged by seeing people without masks. And I think, well, if I were driving an ambulance, I might be thinking 10 more days. Your life could be in my hands and my life could be in your hands. And to be able to confront situations, to be able to have a sense that, yes, actions have consequence, and still have the basis of that be compassion, I think is what we actually really need to model. And it's possible. I totally agree. I think those small things are seemingly small things, are incredibly powerful. And as an adult, I see so many people held back. We don't do the small thing because we think it's too small. And that not just about our own personal wellness, about helping someone else. And I too have seen many people shopping for an elderly neighbor in New York City or something like that. And for many people, it's the only thing that has relieved their anxiety is to reach out and try to make a difference. And for other people, it's all like, that's not gonna, that's not gonna do much, so I won't do anything. And we need to confront that as well.
Well, and this even goes back to our basic, neuroscience, how our brains work. If you think of these small things like Rangan's talking about, or building compassion like Sharon's talking about, our brains form habits. This is my lab studies. How do our brains form habits? How can we break bad habits? And it all comes down to how rewarding a behavior is. So if we can even simply pay attention to what it feels like to be divisive or to other, to say, I'm right, you're wrong. See what that feels like compared to what it feels like when we're connected, working together. To our brains, it's a no-brainer. The connection just feels better. And what that does is help foster that as a new habit. So, these gratitude practices, like Rangan's talking about, if we can see how they actually work and take a moment to just reflect on how wonderful it feels, and importantly, how much better it feels to be connected than to be disconnected, and make that link. Oh, connection feels better than disconnection. That helps really wire this at a very fundamental neural level.
Jud, would you also say a little bit about what we're learning about? So contagion is not a happy word this year, but social contagion is a good thing, the way you study it. So, and I think that feels like an important piece to add here, that as we work on ourselves, it automatically has a power to affect the world around us, to imprint the world around us. And that's a good thing to know.
Yes. So social contagion. So we can think of physical contagion, virus. If you stay, a couple of meters apart from each other, you're less likely to pass a physical virus from one person to another. But social contagion, simply the passage of emotion or, emotion from one person to another. So that can spread, somebody can sneeze on your brain from anywhere in the world. If you go on social media and somebody is, freaked out, then you're likely to catch that. They've just sneezed on your brain and you're more likely to freak out. And then you're more likely to go and freak out on social media and spread that to other people. So just knowing this helps us start to step back and say, oh, wait a minute, do I want to spread this social contagion? Can I put on my mental mask and not spread it, not put out that tweet or that post on Instagram or Facebook or whatever? And at the same time, if we know how social contagion works, oh, I can infect anybody. What do I want to infect people with? Well, kindness feels pretty good. Let's sneeze that. Let's unflatten that curve.
Wow. Social contagion. When you think about it just like that, if you can sneeze on somebody's brain from across the world, that is amazing. I sometimes you'll share something thinking that it will benefit people to know, like Corona, and how it's passed, and what precautions need to be taken. I posted something that I thought was terrifying, actually. It was a woman who was very, very, very sick. She had pre-existing conditions. And I thought that this was a good thing to remind people, just to be aware that, people are dying, from the coronavirus, and that it is not at all pleasant in any way, shape, or form, that it can be very painful. I'm wondering now if I did the right thing.
I've been thinking, Sharon, about this kind of, you've taken us back to a hard place Jill, and actually we have to keep going back to hard places because the picture is very complex now, and it is hard.
The difference between fear and information, inciting fear and giving information.
And also, I think, there are a lot of lines that, well, first of all, the work ahead, all the things that have been revealed to us this year, many of which were not new, but the work ahead is long, right? We have a world to remake, which is terribly challenging and terribly exciting. And I feel like, Sharon, you're very wise on what do we know about how to take in, Jill, as you said, what is ugly, right? Like what we have to look at in our own lives and the history of the places we inhabit. And also just being present to the pain, so much pain that is out there now. And how do we take that in and even have feelings of complicity or guilt or shame? That how do we work with those responses, which are moral responses on some level, or moral impulses, so that they send us back out into the world to contribute rather than just getting paralyzed, which is, I know, also a place a lot of people are going this year. And that's why I feel like this conversation, and it's an understandable place. That's why I feel like this conversation is really, really significant.
First I want to say I'm confident you did the right thing, truly, because clearly your motivation was a good motivation, and that information is a good thing, even if it's frightening, even if it's disturbing, because we need to understand the truth of things. And I think the confusion and the uncertainty have been a whole extra burden on top of everything else. And I think it's important. And I think, Krista, the place you described is a very hard place. And there's a moral reckoning that is happening, which is very important. There's a reveal that is happening of many inequalities that are very important to see. And at the same time, we have to understand, how do we learn? How do we go on? How do we change? And that can't be just kind of being enveloped in the sense of shame. In some ways, Jud, I have to ask you about this quotation. A psychologist once said to me, they said, the brain filled with shame cannot learn. And so maybe it's a little bit like what you were saying before. We have to understand how much potential we have as human beings, alone and together, and that we can move toward that potential. So when we do feel even the disgrace of some of our actions or beliefs we've held or assumptions we've made, to understand this is part of the human condition. It's not mine. And I didn't will it. It's not what I wanted, but due to conditioning, due to habit formation, this is where my life was going, and that I can learn to be with it, have compassion for myself, recognize that there's a big difference between feeling something and being defined by it and acting from it and making choices from it. And that we have such amazing power of awareness and compassion and balance. And we can learn it step by step. We can really change how we relate to what is happening. It doesn't quite work when we spend all our time distressed over what we feel or ways we've been. We go to a very different place. And I think it probably does have something to do with what Jud was talking about. We don't see the reward in some way. We're just kind of lost.
Jud, would you like to add anything to that?
Just briefly, as Sharon's talking about, what is it? Brain filled with, or mind filled with shame cannot
learn. The quote was, the brain filled with shame cannot learn.
Yeah. So if you think about it, shame feels closed down, contracted. And you can think of that as like a fixed mindset, or, we're not literally open to learning. And so when we're caught up in shame, we're not in a place to learn. We're not in growth mindset. And so there, if we can recognize shame, if we can turn toward it, if we can hold it in awareness, that can open us up to where we can kind of bow to whatever happened as a teacher and say, oh, here's something that happened in the, am I dwelling on it? Am I feeling shame? Am I feeling guilt? Is that spiraling me into a shame spiral? Or can I step back and recognize it? Oh, there's shame. What does this feel like? Am I getting lost in the past? Can I notice that as being lost in the past and just hold that as a thought or as thinking? And as I hold that in awareness, that naturally helps me open to seeing beyond that little narrow shame spiral. So absolutely, I think, with awareness, it helps us kind of break out of those shame spirals and literally open so that we can learn.
Feel like, Jill saying how do we live, right? So what does that shame, what does it call us to? That we call ourselves to?
Acknowledgement, accountability, the possibility to change and evolve and let go and not harbor and hold on to things. Shame, facing ugly. Helpful.
Well, we've been talking about wholeness here, and that is also part of our wholeness, right, as human beings. Those are places we go and things that can come to define us.
I think the other part of it is everything Jill was saying. It's like we have to look at the flowers. We have to look at the sunset. We have to drink that water. We have to, take a breath and also have appreciation for the good, because we can overlook that as well.
We just have a couple of...
we forgot.
Good.
I'm sorry. It's as if we've forgotten how to be children, how to enjoy and be simple and value and love and be kind. It's not rocket science. Anybody can do it. We all can do this. We can all be genuine and generous to each other. And we can breathe and take a moment. And if it's too much, deep breath, write it down, dance it out, sing it out, talk it out, but get it out. And so that you can move forward. This has been a time for us to see our faults and to see the ugly parts. Now it's time to move forward. There is nothing else to do. We see what the old stuff holds. Time to move forward.
We have 1 minute left, but I feel like you just gave us our last word. Would anyone else like to just add a couple of words, even kind of a blessing or a wish for yourself or for everybody listening in terms of moving into healing now in this next year ahead?
I would just say, may we all notice moments of kindness, no matter how small they are, whether it's something we've done for something else or something that somebody else has done for us, and just to savor that so we can see how rewarding it is. We can help remind our brains how great that feels so that kindness can spread.
Yeah, I love that. And can I just add that when we think about health, going back to what we started this with, let's not forget about connection. Humans are social beings. That is one of the things that has been most difficult for people all over the world during these restrictions. But we need to connect. We have an innate need for connection. If you can't do it in person, do it on the phone. Do it over text message. Send someone a text message of kindness. Have a Zoom call, but please put connection right at the top of the tree. It's so, so important.
Sharon,
if you can't help good, don't hinder it.
There you go.
Lovely.
Sharon, a quick word out.
Oh, thank you all. This is really lovely, and may we all remember how much we are capable of.
Thank you.
I want to hug you all.
Thanks for having us. I wish we could have heard you sing, Jill. That's the only thing I regret about this.
I wish I could just send you big hugs. Big hugs, family. Big hugs.
Yeah. Big hugs back.
Thank you.
Thank you.